The word mommy didn't just break my heart. It shattered the entire axis of my world. I stood frozen in the doorway of our tastefully decorated living room, a bag of groceries slipping from my numb fingers. A ripe avocado rolled across the polished oak floor, coming to rest against the leg of my cousin Anya's chair. She didn't notice. Her attention was entirely on the little boy, the son I had raised since his first breath, who was now clambering into her lap. "Mommy, read this one," Liam said, holding up his favorite dinosaur book. Anya's smile was a blade twisted in my gut. She glanced over his head and her eyes met mine. There was no surprise there. No guilt. Only a cool, victorious glint. "Of course, my love." The pieces, the 1,000 tiny inconsistencies I'd blissfully ignored for years, suddenly snapped into a horrifying, perfect picture. The late nights at the office. The business trips Anya always seemed to accompany him on. My husband Mark's constant, subtle belittling of my role as a mother. "You're too coddling, Alara," he'd say. "You baby him." Now I understood. He was making space for her. I don't remember confronting him. The memory is a red haze. I must have screamed, cried, thrown accusations. But I remember his response with crystal clarity. He was calm, chillingly so, leaning against our marble kitchen island as if I were a mildly inconvenient salesperson. "If your father hadn't used his influence as mayor to block my scholarship, I never would have married you, Alara," he said, his voice flat. "Marrying you was the act of a desperate man. A dog eating scraps to survive." The cruelty was so calculated it stole my breath. Anya joined him then, slinking into the kitchen like the serpent she was. She didn't speak. She just handed me a single sheet of paper. A paternity test. Mark's name was listed as the father. A 99.99% probability. "It's a good thing your dad had that unfortunate accident with the town car," Anya said, her voice a syrupy poison. "Really, it was a mercy. Otherwise, my son would still be calling you Mom." The world tilted. My father's death, a sudden brutal hit-and-run I'd always believed was a tragic accident, now reeked of sinister possibility. I stumbled back, my mind screaming, my body trembling with a need for vengeance so pure it was terrifying. But Mark was always 5 steps ahead. He must have been planning this for years. My grief and rage were diagnosed not as a justified reaction to ultimate betrayal, but as hysterical psychosis. He had me committed to Oak Haven Sanitarium. My protests were the ravings of a madwoman. My truths were the delusions of a broken mind. I lasted less than 3 days in that sterile hell. A friendly nurse with sad eyes brought me a tray. "This will help you rest, dear," she said. The juice tasted metallic. The world softened at the edges, then went black. I felt a profound final sense of injustice. This was it. This was how my story ended. Not with a fight, but with a quiet manufactured euthanasia, clearing the way for Mark and Anya to play happy family with my son in my house. I expected nothingness. I expected peace. I did not expect the scent of sun-baked earth and the weight of a wicker lunch basket in my hand. I blinked. The sterile white walls of Oak Haven were gone, replaced by the sprawling golden fields of my hometown. The air was thick with the smell of hay and distant rain. Sweat trickled down my temple. I was younger. My hands were smoother, tanned from the sun. And there he was. Mark. But not the polished corporate shark who had destroyed me. This was the Mark of my youth, lean and arrogant, his city-bred hands raw from unfamiliar farm work. He was smirking at something one of the other sent-down youths had said. The memories of my past life, my true future, crashed into me with the force of a tidal wave. The betrayal. The theft of my child. My murder. A coldness settled in my soul, a glacial calm that smothered the last embers of the hysterical woman they'd killed. The nearby city youths started their familiar, teasing chant. "Hey Mark. Your country mouse is here with your lunch. Don't wear her out, man." I saw the calculation in Mark's eyes as he turned to me. He saw me not as a person but as a tool, a stepping stone. He would use me, use my father's influence, and then discard me. He would give my child to Anya. He would have me killed. A sneer, cold and sharp, touched my lips. I let the lunch basket hang loosely at my side. "Let's see how you'll manage to get into university without me now, Mark." Mark's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with such cold dismissal in our kitchen, now scanned the field with a practiced, lazy arrogance. But when they landed on me, that laziness sharpened into active contempt. He was performing for his friends, establishing his superiority over the provincial girl foolish enough to adore him. He strode over, his posture radiating annoyance. The other youths quieted down, eager for the show. How many times do I have to say it? His voice was loud, meant to carry. He didn't just take the basket. He shoved me. It wasn't a hard push, but it was unexpected, calculated to humiliate. My foot caught on a clump of dirt and I went down, my ankle twisting beneath me with a sickening sharp pain. The basket tumbled from my grasp, landing upright in the dirt. A wave of scornful laughter and murmuring rose from the villagers and city youths who had stopped to watch. So it was Alara chasing him all on her own. A girl throwing herself at a man like that. How shameless. She's disgraced our whole village. Ruined our reputation. The sharp, throbbing pain in my ankle and the venom in their voices were anchors, tethering me to this brutal reality. This was no dream. I had truly been reborn into this moment. The moment my old life's ruin had truly begun. I saw Mark's eyes flicker to the fallen lunch basket. Seeing that the villagers were all attacking me and no one was paying attention to him, he had the audacity to bend down, not to help me, but to pick up the basket I'd dropped, intending to keep it. "What a waste of good food," he said, his tone dripping with false pragmatism. "I'll take it then. Wasting food is a sin." His fingers brushed the handle. In my past life I would have wept at his cruelty, too heartbroken to move. Now a cold fury surged through me. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew how much a woman's reputation mattered in our small rural community. Yet he insisted on pinning the labels of desperation and man-chasing on me, shredding my standing for a moment's credibility with his friends. And the bitterest pill? Before all this we had been genuinely in love. Or so I'd believed. The daily lunchboxes had started because Mark himself had complained to me, asking me privately to bring him food because he couldn't stomach the communal meals. Now he was using my kindness as a weapon. I tightened my grip on the basket's handle, my knuckles turning white. He tugged, surprised by my resistance. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that after being reborn, we could simply part ways. He could walk his path of selfishness and I would take my own bright road. But he was determined to burn my bridge before I could even step onto it. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I used my hold on the basket to leverage myself up, standing on one foot. I yanked it back from his grasp with a force that made him stumble. Then, ignoring him completely, I hopped past him, my gaze fixed on another figure across the field. Silas Thorne. He was another sent-down youth, but unlike the others who lounged in the shade whenever possible, Silas was always working. He was a quiet, intense boy, often mocked for his silence and his refusal to engage in the others' gossip. He was currently digging irrigation trenches, his shirt off and tied around his waist, his muscles coiling and shifting under a sheen of sweat. He worked with a fierce, focused intensity, as if he could dig his way out of this life through sheer force of will. The crowd fell silent, their jeers dying in their throats. Mark looked completely baffled. I stopped in front of Silas, who paused his digging, looking up at me with wary, dark eyes. "This is for you," I said, my voice clear and steady as I held out the lunch basket. A moment of stunned silence was broken by Mark's spluttering laugh. He recovered quickly, curling his lip into a mocking smirk. "What now?" he called out, playing to the audience. "You couldn't land me, so you're switching targets? Your standards must be pretty low. Any stray guy will do, huh?" He didn't want me, but seeing me show kindness to another man still stung his colossal ego. His voice was dripping with sarcasm as he kept mocking us. "Guess a mute farmhand is better than nothing, right, Alara?" Something in me snapped. The condescension. The entitlement. The echo of his voice in my kitchen calling me a scrap for a dog. I turned, lunged forward despite my ankle and slapped him hard across the face. The crack was shockingly loud in the quiet field. The force of the blow stung my palm, a pain that felt righteous and clean. Mark staggered back, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. I had never ever fought back. Then I stepped back, covered my face with my stinging hand and let the tears come. But these were not tears of helplessness. They were weapons. My voice when I spoke was loud and clear, perfectly pitched to carry to every onlooker. I let it waver just enough, layering it with a convincing tremor of hurt innocence. "My dad said, you city youth work hard and suffer a lot. So he asked me to bring this meat lunch to thank you all. I opened the basket, revealing the contents. Thick slices of glistening pork belly, crispy fried anchovies, and a container of steaming, fragrant rice. A collective gasp and a wave of swallowed longing went through the crowd. Meat was a rare luxury. Then I suddenly changed my tone, pointing a trembling finger straight at Mark. I already gave you a porridge lunch earlier. What? That wasn't enough? You were the one who begged me not to bring food to the other city youths. You said they were all bad people who didn't deserve meat. I let my voice break on a sob. But I thought they deserved to eat too, so I didn't listen to you. And now you're trying to destroy my reputation, accusing me of liking you? I'm still a proper unmarried woman and you've slandered me like this. I won't just sit back and take it. Mark was scratching his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was completely flummoxed, not expecting this tactical strike. But to everyone else, his stunned silence looked exactly like guilt. He looked like a schemer whose plot had just been exposed. I dropped my final bomb. To protect my reputation, I won't be delivering food to any of you city youths anymore. As I said it, the floodgates opened. Not by design but by genuine, overwhelming emotion. The memories of my past life surged up. Over 30 years of being a dutiful wife and mother to a child that wasn't mine, only to end up murdered like a discarded animal. My father's suspicious death. The sorrow was a physical pain in my chest. I began to cry harder, great, heaving sobs that were no longer an act. The injustice of it all crushed me. In the end, the world swam, my ankle gave way and I collapsed on the ground, crying until I passed out. The last thing I saw was the horrified, convinced faces of the villagers. They believed every word. And in their eyes, Mark was no longer a prized city youth. He was a despicable, selfish man who had stolen their meat and ruined a good girl's name. The game had changed. I awoke to the familiar feeling of my own quilt and the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs that always clung to my father's house. For a terrifying second I thought Oakhaven Mark Anya. All of it had been a horrific nightmare. But the dull throb in my ankle and the raw feeling in my throat confirmed the truth. I was back. Truly back. My father, Alistair Croft, was dozing in a chair beside my bed, his head bowed, his broad shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Seeing him alive, his face unlined by the grief Mark would later cause, sent a wave of such profound relief through me that fresh tears welled in my eyes. One of them must have escaped and traced a path down my temple, because his eyes fluttered open. Alara? My baby girl. His voice was rough with sleep and worry. He leaned forward, his big, calloused hand enveloping mine. You're awake. Thank the heavens. Dad, I whispered, the word catching. I'm not dead yet. It was a poor attempt at a joke, but his face lit up with a joy so pure it broke my heart all over again. This man had given everything for me in my first life, including his life, and I had repaid him with willful blindness. But something he'd said when he thought I was asleep clicked in my mind. As long as I'm around, I can still keep him in check a little. He thought I was still obsessed with Mark. I sat up urgently, wincing at the pain. Dad, was it Mark who brought me back? His expression softened with pity. No, my dear. It was Silas Thorne. Carried you all the way from the Northfield himself. Didn't say a word, just laid you gently on the bed, nodded at me and left. I let out a sigh of relief so deep it felt like I'd been holding my breath for a decade. Reborn or not, I wanted no tether to that man, not even one of obligation. But my dad misunderstood my relief for disappointment. His face immediately darkened and he looked down at his hands, choosing his words with obvious care. Sweetheart, Mark is prideful, arrogant. I see the way he looks down on us. As long as I'm here, I can protect you from the worst of it. But if I'm not here anymore... He saw the fresh tears streaming down my face and quickly backtracked, his voice softening. Okay, don't cry. If you really want to marry him, I'll give up my old bones to make it happen for you. The offer, so full of self-sacrifice, was a knife to my soul. I reached out and hugged his arm tightly, clinging to the solid living reality of him. I'll listen to you, Dad. I don't want to marry him. I don't want anything to do with him ever again. The words hung in the air, so stark and unexpected that he could only stare at me. The confession of my past life's folly poured out of me. I told him everything. Not as a fantasy, but as a terrible premonition I'd had while unconscious. I spoke of Mark's calculated seduction, his manipulation, his affair with Anya, the paternity test, the stolen college recommendation, and finally, the cruel twist of fate that would lead to my father's death and my own murder. He'll claim you forced him to marry me by dangling the college slot, I said, my voice hardening. He'll threaten to divorce me and expose the favoritism, unless you keep quiet. And I couldn't finish. I didn't need to. The horror on his face said he could see it too. Fury, dark and terrifying, transformed my gentle father. He slammed his palm on the small bedside table so hard the wood splintered. That bastard! How dare he? How dare he plot against my daughter? I don't care if I'm just the mayor of a small village. There's no way I'm letting him get away with it. I placed my hand over his, calming the tremor of rage. Don't worry, Dad. You don't need to do anything drastic. Evil people will get their punishment. All we have to do is watch. I leaned in and whispered a plan into his ear. It was simple. The other city youths were already furious with Mark for costing them their promised meat. They were useless at farm work, their city stomachs constantly growling with hunger. Mark's selfishness had made him a pariah. We just had to encourage it. After listening, a slow, grim smile spread across my father's face. He gave me a big thumbs up. That's my girl. Brilliant. Once I had recovered, I made a point of casually strolling past the city youth dorms. The air was thick with tension. I saw Mark, eager to regain favor, volunteer to cook dinner that night. His offer was met with thinly veiled sarcasm. No thanks, Sullivan. We're not trying to get poisoned, one of them sneered. A small group huddled together, chatting, but the moment Mark approached, they scattered like startled birds. After a few days of this cold-shouldered isolation, Mark's carefully constructed cool finally cracked. He threw his cap down on the ground and cursed, his voice rising to a shout. I'm a future university student. Damn it, you idiots with your dog eyes can't see worth a damn. You'll all regret this. In my past life, Mark had been a social butterfly, ingratiating himself with everyone. Several of these youths would later make it big in the new economic reforms, and he'd use those connections to climb high. This time I was determined to cut off his wings before they could grow. No allies, no favors. I asked Dad to assign him the nastiest, most isolating jobs in the village, cleaning out the latrines and feeding the pigs. Mark, who had spent his previous life in a comfortable office, was utterly defeated by it. His clothes were permanently caked with filth, and the stench coming off him was so foul that anyone who got within 10 feet instinctively held their noses and hurried away. He saw himself as superior, too noble for such menial labor, and started shouting to anyone who would listen that he was destined for university, that this was all beneath him. The villagers and other city youths all thought he'd gone mad. Because at that time, no one knew the university entrance exams were coming back. Higher education still felt like a distant, impossible dream. Everyone, that is, except one person. My cousin Anya. She for some reason firmly believed in Mark's bright future. While the rest of the group avoided him like the plague, only Anya stayed faithfully by his side. She wouldn't leave him, even snatching the manure shovel from his hands, insisting she'd help. But Mark, in a stunning display of ingratitude, flatly rejected her. Men and women should keep their distance, he said righteously. This could cause misunderstandings. Anya's eyes welled up with hurt. I tried so hard to make you look good in front of Alara so she'd fall for you and get you her dad's support, she whispered, her voice breaking. Now that she doesn't love you anymore, can't you at least think about me? I was hidden behind the pigsty wall, frozen. So that was it. Their alliance had started even earlier than I'd thought. He had used Anya to get to me. And now that he believed the university exam was his ticket out, he wanted nothing to do with a village girl like her. In his eyes, she was just an illiterate bumpkin not worthy of a future graduate. Twisting her fingers shyly, Anya added the final devastating piece. Besides, she said, her voice barely audible, I already belong to you. My body went stiff. So they'd already slept together. Mark's face showed no emotion, only cold dismissal. Just because we slept together, does that mean I have to marry you? Anya burst into tears and ran away. I slipped away too, my mind reeling. But on the road back I ran into Silas Thorne, who was still hard at work long after the others had quit. While they lounged in the shade, Silas was under the blazing sun, digging and planting, sweat pouring down his muscular torso in steady streams. I felt my mouth go dry just watching the raw, focused power of him. I was going to walk away, but I couldn't help remembering what had happened in my past life. My dad had asked me to share the news about the reinstatement of the exams with the city youths. On my way I'd run into Mark. He told me to go home, that he'd inform the others. He never did. It wasn't until 1 month before the exam that the others finally found out and scrambled to catch up. Only Silas had the innate brilliance to meet the cutoff score. And Mark, out of sheer malice, had reported him for some fabricated political indiscretion, getting him disqualified. Yet against all odds, Silas had later become a renowned national researcher, his name cleared posthumously. My father and I had paid the price for Mark's success. This time I would become their benefactor. I walked over to where Silas was working. He paused, looking up at me with those dark, perceptive eyes. He didn't speak, just waited. I leaned in close, the scent of clean sweat and earth filling my senses. "You might want to take a look at the university prep books," I said quietly. "Good news might be coming soon." He bent down slightly, lowering his voice to match mine. "Thank you." His voice was a low rumble. His bare chest was so close to my face I could feel the heat radiating off him. His masculine scent was dizzying. Dad really knows how to pick them, I thought, my mind going briefly, dazedly off track. Now that Silas had enough time to study, I was sure he could perform even better. I planned to use my father's one and only recommendation slot for him, to cancel out any background check issues. To finish what I started, I also quietly passed the message to the rest of the city youths. In my last life, Silas had scored the highest. Mark was second, but nearly 100 points behind, and that was with a 5-month head start. If the others started preparing now, Mark wouldn't stand a chance. The hunger to return to the city was a powerful motivator. The city youths threw themselves into their studies like their lives depended on it. Meanwhile, Mark, still stuck in the fantasy of his past life, didn't study, didn't notice the shift. He was too busy bragging to anyone in the village who would listen about how he was going to be a university man with a government salary. His little tricks managed to deceive quite a few young girls who worshipped the idea of an educated husband, coaxing them into sneaking valuables from their homes for him. Little by little, day after day, I quietly watched. Since it wasn't life-threatening, I didn't step in. After all, when the exam results were announced and he failed, those girls and their families would have plenty to say. Ethan was making a name for himself, all right. A name that was about to become mud. The village's obsession with Mark became a bizarre spectacle. Most of the villagers were illiterate and held anyone with a scrap of education in reverent awe. Farmers started volunteering to do his chores for him. The local matchmaker arrived at our door, not for me, but to ask if she could introduce him to the wealthiest girl in the next county. Wherever Mark went, people treated him with a fawning deference, nodding and bowing as if he were already a government official. "When you make it big, Mark, don't forget us poor folks back here," they'd say, pressing gifts of food and tobacco into his hands. Thanks to their support, Mark was eating meat and delicacies every single day. While Silas and the others were hunched over books, their faces pale in the lamplight, Mark was feasting and holding court, not touching a single book. The villagers' delusion began to feel like a tangible force, and even I started to feel a thread of unease. If a man like Mark could succeed in my last life, what was stopping me? The thought was a spark in dry tinder. I was no longer the lovesick girl who thought her destiny was to be a wife. I had a sharp mind, and I'd been running my father's household account since I was 15. I prepared a basket of eggs and fresh bread and went to find Silas Thorne. I found him behind the youth dorm, shirtless again, chopping wood with a rhythmic, powerful intensity. The play of muscles in his back and arms made my breath catch. He stopped when he saw me, setting the axe down and quickly pulling on his shirt, a faint flush on his cheeks. After I explained why I'd come, to ask for his help studying, he agreed without a moment's hesitation. "It would be an honor," he said, his formal tone making me smile. I also asked Dad to buy me a stack of prep materials, and just like that I joined the study group. I was naturally good at literature and history, but mathematics was a foreign language. Silas, however, had a gift for it. He could break down complex problems into simple logical steps, his low, patient voice guiding me through the mysteries of calculus. I was exhausted every day, my eyes straining from reading by candlelight, but I felt a deep, thrumming sense of satisfaction I'd never known. Meanwhile, Anya, seeing Mark become the most sought-after man in the county, couldn't sit still any longer. She came to find me at the edge of the field where Silas and I often studied. "Ilara," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Let's work together. We can get that city girl who's been flirting with him kicked out. Then we can compete for him fairly." I shook my head, but she thought I was just pretending to be noble. "He's going to be a university graduate, a government official one day," she insisted, her eyes gleaming with ambition. I shrugged, a cold idea forming. "If you want results, let people see your relationship firsthand. That works better than words." She seemed to have an epiphany, a sly smile touching her lips. "You're right. Of course you're right." But before she left, her eyes drifted toward the stack of books beside me. As she turned to go, I saw her secretly slip one of Silas's handmade notebooks, filled with his meticulous math notes, into the sleeve of her dress. I didn't say anything. I just watched her go. The next day the rumors started. Whispers slithered through the village like snakes. They said I was sneaking into the youth dorms at night to sleep with Silas. Even worse, some claimed Silas was selling his body to me to boost his chances of getting the mayor's recommendation. The source was obvious. My fury was a cold, clean thing. I didn't confront Anya. I went straight to the source. I kicked open the door to the room Mark shared with 3 others and dragged him out by his collar, right into the village square. "Everyone, listen," I shouted, my voice ringing out. A crowd gathered instantly, eager for drama. I held up the practice problems and study notes I'd been working on. "I, Ilara Croft, have dreams too. I want to go to university. And some jealous, pathetic lowlife can't stand seeing someone else improve." I glared directly at Mark. I wonder who that could be. Mark flushed a deep, ugly red. He still thought the second chance was a gift for him alone, that he was in complete control. His arrogance was his undoing. "You?" he sneered, laughing for the benefit of the crowd. "A village girl? You think you can go to university? Keep dreaming. Someone like you is meant to rot in the dirt your whole life." He didn't notice how the villagers' eyes were narrowing, their expressions cooling. They might believe in his potential, but they didn't like hearing their home and their children's futures described as dirt. I pushed him further. "So you're the only one destined for greatness? The only one in this entire village smart enough to pass?" He took the bait, roaring so loud his voice cracked. "I'll say it here and now. In this whole village, including the city folks, only I will pass that exam. If you get in, I'll eat every pile of manure in this village clean. But if you don't, you'll kneel and give me 100 cows." The gamble was set. From that day forward, I pushed myself even harder. The villagers mocked me, calling me delusional. "Dragons give birth to dragons," they'd say. "Phoenixes give birth to phoenixes. You're just a dirt girl. You should stop dreaming and just use your looks to snag Mark. Be his wife. Beg for mercy in bed, you won't lose face." I gritted my teeth and refused to give in. And through it all, Silas was there. A quiet, solid presence behind me, explaining one more equation, testing me on one more historical date, his belief in me a silent fortress against their scorn. The day of the exam results arrived. The mailman came running into the village, waving his arms excitedly. "Good news. For people from our village got in. One of them is even the top scorer in the entire province." He called out 2 names first, 2 of the city youths who had studied tirelessly. Then he paused for dramatic effect. Every pair of eyes in the village was locked on him. Mark Sullivan shoved Silas and me aside, puffed out his chest, and boldly snatched the last 2 letters from the mailman's hands. "So sorry, everyone," he said smugly. "Looks like I accidentally became the top scorer." Just as he finished speaking, the mailman shouted, "Congratulations to Ilara Croft, our national top scorer. And congratulations to Silas Thorne, top scorer in the province." The moment played out like a perfect, painful comedy. Mark's hand froze in midair, the unopened letters meant for us clutched in his fist. His face went from triumph to confusion to sheer, unadulterated horror. The crowd erupted. Wasn't he the one bragging nonstop? Turns out he didn't even pass. What a disgrace. Furious, humiliated, Mark grabbed my acceptance letter from my hand and tore it to shreds. "You stole my spot," he screamed, his voice hysterical. "You used your father's position to take what was mine. Just because I turned you down, you ruined my future." I laughed, the sound cold and clear. Wow, you really think you're that desirable? Sorry, but I'm not a dog and you're definitely not a prize. I slapped him so hard he staggered sideways, the torn pieces of my letter fluttering to the ground like confetti. But even then he refused to see the truth. Of course you did well. You've got connections. Sleep with the right people and everything falls into your lap, he shrieked. I'm going to report you. I'm going to report you all the way to the top. His dramatic performance was interrupted by the arrival of several official government cars. A group of well-dressed officials from the provincial capital stepped out, coming to personally congratulate the top scorers. They walked straight into the middle of Mark's meltdown. Seeing their powerful presence, Mark's arrogance faltered, but his delusion held. He ran up, threw himself at the lead official's legs and wailed. Sir, you have to help me. They're abusing their power. Trampling the rights of us commoners. Do we city youth not deserve basic fairness? It was a sensitive, dangerous accusation. The journalists who had come to cover the top scorers quickly turned their cameras on the officials and the sobbing Mark. The lead official, his face stern, had no choice but to act. Pull up the complete exam scores and test papers for all 3 students. I want them here in 10 minutes. The entire village waited, holding its breath. My father was sweating bullets. Even I clenched my fists, nervous despite my belief in my answers. Only Mark looked confident, taunting us between sobs. If you admit it now, maybe I'll be merciful. Beg me. Just then staff arrived with our sealed test papers. Mark spotted a faint 6 on the front of his and nearly jumped for joy. I scored over 600. I'm the real top scorer. Look, everyone, proof. The villagers began to look at Silas and me with suspicion. But the lead official completely ignored Mark. He walked straight to us, raised our hands high and announced, "These 2 students earned their results fair and square. No tampering. No cheating." The sound was the official slapping the score sheet against his palm. Ethan Sullivan scored 69. Not 600. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then the crowd burst into laughter, loud and derisive. He didn't even score as high as Silas's lowest mark. Mark's mind broke. He refused to accept it. Ripping out a handful of his own hair, he pointed a wild finger at the officials. You were bribed. By her. What did she do? Sleep with you? I'll report this to the top. The official had had enough. Have you no shame? But before Mark could slink away, the butcher, the father of one of the girls Mark had swindled, showed up. He grabbed Mark by the collar. You're the one who tricked my daughter into stealing from us. Without another word, he punched Mark square in the face, knocking out 2 front teeth. That was the tipping point. Like a dam breaking, other villagers came forward. No wonder we've been missing eggs. My daughter gave him my pocket watch. Dozens of accusations flew. Deceit. The official's face was grim. The government was cracking down hard on rural crime. He waved his hand. Take Ethan Sullivan into custody. Bring him in for a full investigation. As they dragged him away, screaming protests, I finally allowed myself to breathe. His wings were well and truly clipped. The path ahead for the first time was mine to walk. The silence that settled over the village after Mark's screaming departure was profound. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but the heavy, breathless hush that follows a thunderclap. All eyes were on Silas and me, the air thick with a new, uncertain respect. The officials shook our hands again, their congratulations now layered with relief that the scandal had been resolved so publicly in our favor. The journalists, their cameras finally turned away from the spectacle, took their pictures of us, the real top scorers, our faces a mix of exhaustion and dazed triumph. My father clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, his grip trembling slightly, not with fear, but with overwhelming pride. "Pie girl," he kept murmuring, his voice thick. "Pie brilliant, brilliant girl." The celebration that should have been ours was muted, overshadowed by the drama. People drifted away in small, whispering groups, dissecting every moment of Mark's spectacular downfall. Silas stood beside me, a solid, silent pillar. He hadn't said more than a few words throughout the entire ordeal, but his presence was a fortress. "Your letter," he said quietly, looking at the shredded pieces of my acceptance on the ground. "It doesn't matter," I said, though a part of me ached at the loss. "The score is what matters. They'll send another." He nodded, then bent down and carefully began gathering every single scrap of paper. He didn't say why, just meticulously collected them all and placed them inside his own acceptance letter, folding it carefully into his pocket. The gesture was so oddly tender and purposeful that it left me speechless. In the days that followed, the village's attitude towards me underwent a seismic shift. The whispers of "delusional dirt girl" were replaced with awed murmurs of "national top scorer." The same people who had mocked my studying now pointed me out to their children as an example. It was fickle and unsettling, but I preferred this kind of attention infinitely more. A few days later, a new, official acceptance letter arrived for me. Silas came to my house that evening holding both of our letters. He stood awkwardly in our main room, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him, even when facing down government officials. "Ilara," he began, his voice a low rumble. He thrust the letters out for me to see. As I looked at them, the names of prestigious universities side by side, the full weight of it finally hit me. We had done it. We had truly changed our fate. I couldn't help it. I thought of our past lives, how I had been killed by the man who shared my bed, how Silas had been falsely accused and had his brilliant future stolen before it began. We had both died miserable, unjust deaths. But this life was different. We had seized our destiny. I was no longer an illiterate girl defined by her husband. I could support myself. I could be someone. The tears came then, silent and streaming down my face. They were tears of relief, of grief for the people we had been, and of joy for the people we had become. Silas panicked. He fumbled through his pockets, pulling out a clean, if slightly rough, handkerchief. He gently, almost reverently, wiped my tears away. "Don't cry," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "It hurts me to see you like this." As soon as the words left his mouth, he seemed to realize their intimacy. His ears turned a deep, burning red, and I felt a matching heat flood my own cheeks. We stood there in the dim light of the oil lamp, the silence between us now charged with something new and terrifyingly wonderful. Through all the days we had spent studying together, fighting toward the same goal, a bond had naturally formed. I had come to admire not just his quiet intelligence, but his unwavering integrity, the tenderness he kept hidden behind that stoic exterior. After a long moment he took a step back, then did something that shocked me to my core. He dropped to one knee on the hard-packed earth floor of my home. "Ilara," he said, his voice trembling slightly but his gaze steady on mine. "I like you. I want to marry you. I swear I'll treat you well for the rest of my life." He slowly pulled out a small object wrapped in soft cloth from his pocket. Unfolding it, he revealed a simple but beautiful green jade bracelet. It shimmered in the lamplight, its color deep and cool. "This is a family heirloom from the Thorn family," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Passed down for generations. It's meant for our daughter-in-law. Will you wear it?" I covered my mouth with my hands, crying uncontrollably again, but this time from a happiness so profound it felt like healing. "Yes," I managed to choke out through the tears. "Yes, Silas. I will." He slipped the bracelet onto my wrist. It felt cool and right against my skin, a promise of a future I had never dared to dream of. He went out the next day and bought liquor and fine tea, then formally visited my father to ask for my hand. My dad, who had liked and respected Silas from the very beginning, was overjoyed. He agreed immediately with only one request. "Before you two leave for university," he said, his eyes glistening, "we need to hold a proper wedding celebration right here in the village. I want everyone to see my daughter marry a good, worthy man." Silas agreed without hesitation. The following weeks were a whirlwind of non-stop chaos. We threw ourselves into wedding preparations while simultaneously packing for our new lives at university. We were so busy, so focused on the bright future ahead, that we stopped thinking about Mark entirely. It was a mistake. After just 4 days in police custody, Mark was released. The charges of theft, while numerous, were mostly for small items: eggs, a little money, a pocket watch. The families, shamed by their daughter's gullibility and unwilling to press formal charges that would bring more scandal, had withdrawn their complaints. The officials, likely wanting to avoid the messy politics of a sent-down youth's prosecution, had let him go with a severe warning. He had the nerve to show up at my house, acting as if the entire humiliating spectacle had never happened. I was sorting through my university supplies when a familiar, now loathsome voice called my name from outside. I opened the door to find him standing there, trying to look contrite but failing miserably. His eyes still held that familiar arrogance, though it was now layered with a desperate, calculating gleam. "Elara," he began, launching into a ridiculous, rehearsed speech. "I've had time to think. I was confused, blinded by ambition. But I see now that you're the one who's always truly cared for me. We can start over." I was so stunned by his audacity I could only stare. "I am engaged to be married," I said, my voice icy. "Do not disgust me with your pathetic performance." But Mark was convinced it was all an act. "I know you're only pretending to be close to Silas to make me jealous," he said, a smug smile playing on his lips. "But now that I'm back you can toss that mute out. We can be together." Then, licking his lips in that slimy way he dared to propose his deal. "Let's start over. You give up your university spot. Stay here, help me study for next year's exam. When I get in you'll enjoy the good life too. And I swear if I ever betray you I'll die a horrible death. Get hit by a car right outside." The sheer, unvarnished gall of it took my breath away. He wanted me to sacrifice my hard-won future to be his live-in tutor and nursemaid, to wait hand and foot on the man who had murdered me in another life. And he thought he was being generous. I gave a cold, sharp laugh. "Great. I hope the car gets you then. Better that than seeing you cozy up with my cousin again. If your promises were worth believing, pigs could fly." I'd had enough. I grabbed the iron shovel leaning against the wall by the door and without another word swung it hard at his shin. The connection was solid, met with a satisfying thwack and an immediate blood-curdling scream. He finally yanked his leg back, howling in pain. I seized the chance and slammed the door in his swollen, furious face. But he still wouldn't give up. He knelt right there in the dirt outside our gate, bawling for forgiveness, swearing he wouldn't leave unless I came out and spoke to him. Luckily that was when Silas returned from the market. He rounded the corner, took in the scene, me glaring through a crack in the door, Mark kneeling and wailing on the ground, and his usually calm face darkened with a storm I'd never seen before. He didn't shout. He didn't announce his presence. He just walked up to Mark, grabbed him by the collar and aimed a single solid punch straight to his face. Mark, who had been planning some dramatic speech, ended up with a newly swollen eye and a dislocated jaw. Any thought of a fight left him as he clutched his face, sputtering in pain and outrage. He had no choice but to flee, limping away and spitting out one last bitter remark over his shoulder. "He's just a pawn you're using to provoke me. The only person she truly loves is me. Just wait. She'll leave you." Then he tripped over the same rock I'd always told him to move and fell flat on his face in the mud. It was Anya who had to help him up. She emerged from the shadows where she'd been watching, her face a mask of hurt and fury. She half-dragged, half-carried him away, his injured leg trailing behind him. The last time I'd seen them after her head injury, she had decided he was her one true love. Even after his arrest she'd never left his side, still believing he was destined for greatness. Yet despite her devotion he still came crawling back to me. Her devotion was about to be tested like never before. The day of our wedding dawned clear and bright. The entire village was decked out in red banners and festive lanterns. The air smelled of roasting meat and sweet pastries. After the turmoil, people were eager for a pure, happy celebration. I wore a red cheapao my father had commissioned, embroidered with phoenixes. Silas looked devastatingly handsome in a traditional dark suit, his usually serious face softened by a genuine, unwavering smile. We walked from table to table, toasting our guests, accepting their blessings. The joy was real, a palpable thing. My father beamed, his face finally free of the worry lines that had plagued him for years. And then, like a specter at the feast, he appeared. Mark. He came running into the courtyard, dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting bright red suit, clearly intending to mimic a groom. His face was still bruised from Silas's fist, but his eyes burned with a deranged intensity. In front of everyone he dropped to one knee in the middle of the courtyard, right in front of me. "Elara," he cried, his voice cracking with false emotion. "I know you're just trying to get back at me, to make me jealous, and you've succeeded. I finally realized how much I love you. Let's run away together right now." The music screeched to a halt. The laughter and chatter died. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch the unbelievable drama unfold. I was absolutely livid. I looked at Silas, my voice low and steady. "Get him out of here." But Mark, fueled by madness and desperation, clung to the nearest tree, his fingers digging into the bark. "She loves me. She's always loved me. This is all a charade. It was Anya who finally broke. She had been standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her one true love humiliate himself and her in front of the entire village. The devotion she had clung to through arrest and poverty finally shattered. She let out a wordless cry of rage and rushed forward, grabbing at his arm. "Stop it. Stop making a fool of yourself." "Of me," she screamed. Mark, annoyed at the interruption, shoved her aside without even looking. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough. Anya stumbled backward, her heels catching on the uneven ground. She fell hard, her head snapping back against the corner of a nearby table before she crumpled to the ground. A terrible silence fell. Then a dark pool of blood began to spread slowly beneath her skirts from a wound on the back of her head. A woman screamed. "She's bleeding. She's miscarrying." The words hung in the air. Anya had been pregnant. With Mark's child. The child he had just killed with his carelessness. The sight of the blood, the final tragic consequence of his selfishness, broke the last of Silas's formidable control. With a roar of pure fury, he crossed the courtyard in 3 strides. He didn't punch Mark this time. He simply grabbed him by the throat and the belt of his ridiculous suit and physically threw him out of the courtyard, sending him sprawling into the street like a bag of garbage. "If you ever come near her again, I will kill you," Silas said, his voice so low and cold it was more terrifying than any shout. Mark scrambled backward, his bravado utterly gone, replaced by raw terror, before turning and fleeing into the alleys. The wedding celebration after that was a somber affair. Anya was carried away by her family, unconscious and bleeding. The joy was tainted, but we continued. We had to. It was a statement of resilience. We were married under the eyes of the village, our union sealed not just by love, but by the fire we had passed through together. After the wedding, Silas and I moved to the capital to attend university. Armed with the memories of our past lives and a fierce determination, we seized every opportunity. We studied relentlessly, but we also saw the patterns of the future, the economic reforms, the technological shifts. We invested time and the little money we had in ideas others thought were foolish. Our humble beginnings became a strength, giving us a resilience others lacked. We climbed higher and higher together, a perfect team. A few years later, my father retired. Silas and I returned to the village for an ancestral memorial, then brought Dad back to the city with us. We bought a small house with a garden where he could putter about, finally free from worry, finally able to enjoy a comfortable and peaceful life. It was on one of our visits back to the village to see old friends that we happened to run into the echoes of our past. We heard about Anya first. After her miscarriage and head injury, her parents, desperate and shamed, had married her off to a widowed minor official in a neighboring town. A man known for a violent temper who had already driven away 3 previous wives. She had given birth to 3 daughters in quick succession. The story went that one night, drunk and furious about the lack of a male heir, he had beaten her so badly she was left paralyzed from the waist down. She now lived in a back room of his house, a ghost tended to by her young daughters. As for Mark, his story was even darker. He had never recovered from his humiliation. He spent his days drowning in cheap alcohol, still slurring stories to anyone who would listen about how he was a university man, how it had all been stolen from him. He became a fixture of the taverns, a pathetic joke. One night, dead drunk, he had passed out in the middle of the road that led out of the village. The same road where my father had his accident in another life. A cargo truck, speeding in the dark, didn't see him. The driver claimed he'd swerved, but not enough. Both of Mark's legs were crushed and had to be amputated above the knee. Now he survives by sitting on a ragged mat at the edge of the market, a beggar. His mind is gone, lost to alcohol and delusion. He mutters about university and stolen futures to the coins people toss into his cup out of pity or disgust. We saw him once from a distance. Silas instinctively moved to shield me from the sight, but I looked. I saw the hollowed-out shell of the man who had once been my entire world, then my greatest nightmare. There was no satisfaction in it, no glee. Only a cold, quiet sense of closure. The universe had balanced its books. The car in the end had indeed gotten him. Not as he'd sworn in his false oath, but as a messy, pathetic consequence of the life he himself had chosen. We turned away from that grim scene and walked back to our waiting car. Silas held my hand, his grip strong and sure. We drove back to our home in the city, to our life of wealth earned through intelligence and integrity, to a happiness that was deep and peaceful and built on a foundation of mutual respect. We had walked through fire and emerged not just unscathed but stronger. And as I looked at my husband, at my father dozing in the sunny garden, I knew with absolute certainty that every painful step, every moment of terror and struggle had been worth it. This was the bright path I had chosen. This was my true life. The end.